Well, I think it's time for our keynote from Adrian Hornsby. Adrian is a principal developer advocate at Amazon Web Services. Incredible. He has almost 20 years of experience in the IT industry, having worked as a software and systems engineer across backend, web, and mobile. He's been part of DevOps teams. He's worked on cloud infrastructure and site reliability, writing application software, deploying service, managing large-scale architectures. Whew, man, I did it all in one breath. That's incredible. I actually did lie a little bit because Adrian is going to be presenting live. So he is the only speaker at our community day who is doing it live. It's incredible. It is something like 4 a.m. for him. So, Adrian, thank you for joining us today. You are currently in Helsinki. You just got back from a holiday. How have you been?
Hi, Peter, and thanks a lot for the intro, and sorry for the breathless bio. It's been good, thanks. I took 1 week off. It's actually been quite nice. Did a lot of climbing. I'm an avid climber and downhill mountain biker, and that was good. I didn't get hurt, doing neither sports, so that was my number one goal, because I did my first mountain bike downhill competition last weekend, and I was happy I didn't get hurt. So.
How did you go?
Let's say it was my first competition. It was 32 out of 37. That's the the last.
Bad. Not bad at all.
Yeah. I'm actually not familiar with mountain bike, so maybe it's a dumb question. Why is it actually downhill? What's wrong with downhill?
That's a good question. I'd say the bikes we use are full suspension bikes, and they're pretty heavy, and they go around rough terrain. So we use ski lifts to go up the hill, maybe because the bikes are not good for that, and then we just try to go as fast as possible downhill.
Wow. I'll be honest, if I was on a bike, I would prefer to go downhill rather than uphill as well. But that's just me.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, Adrian, we are all very keen to hear your keynote, which is titled 10 Lessons from 12 Years Working on AWS. Look, I reckon we will not believe number 6, whatever that is. So let's hand over to you and give you a chance to do your keynote. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter. And first of all, I would really like to thank everyone in the AWS community in Australia and New Zealand, and in particular you, the AWS heroes, who have really helped put this event together. You are really the star of this event. So in particular, Augusto, aka Gus, which I learned today is your nickname. Peter and Nathan, and of course John as well, behind the scene, who is AWS John, the OBS ninja, making sure that all the streams are happening nice. So thank you very much. You've done an amazing, job building this community. So thank you again. A little reminder as well that if you plan to share your day with others on social medias, you have different hashtags. So AWS Community Day, ANZ is probably the preferred one. All right, so I don't think I have to introduce myself because Pete has gone breathless to do that. So I'll jump right into the conversation. So to give you some details a little bit, a few years ago, I did a talk called 10 Lessons from 10 Years on AWS. Actually, it was a talk that I gave at the Community Day in Bangalore, in India. And back then, there wasn't any COVID virus, so I actually traveled there. It was not 4 a.m., so I didn't have to confinate myself too much. And it was really awesome. And I wish I could be with you today on site, but instead I'm virtual here in Finland. It's 4 a.m., it's early morning, the sun is about to come up, and so bear with me, I might be a little bit slow because it's the morning. So I said I did this talk 2 years ago, but it really feels it was like 10 years ago. And there's one good author, G.R. Ream, said, at the information age, one tech year is equivalent to a personal lifetime. And while that is true, I actually recently found myself pretty influenced by a dog. The name is Hilma. You can see her on the picture here on the slide. It's American Staff, and she is lovely as possible. And she especially loves giving kisses, right? So while now I see take ears more like dog ears with a ratio of approximately 1:7. So if I gave this talk 2 years ago, it really feels like it's 14 years ago. It's such a long time. So I'm trying to say that really time flies and fast. And for today, I thought it would be quite interesting to look back at the past and see what went well and what didn't. So as I said, I did a similar talk at 2.5 years ago, and looking at it now, it feels that I need to make some corrections, right? So you can see the summary of that initial slide I did like 14 years ago, which was actually 2.5 years ago. So there's embrace failure, local states, immutable infrastructure as code, asynchronous patterns, scaling, databases, measurement, prepare for failure, build it, you're running, learn from others. And I mean, while there's no real problem in there, do you still notice something wrong, actually? I certainly do. When looking back to it, the big mistake I really did was really to focus on technology, and not that what is on the slide is wrong, quite the opposite, actually. It's still very true, but the lessons don't really qualify as life lessons. They are technological decisions. So they are not lessons that really make you grow as a person. So today I thought I'd try to do a better job and share some of the lessons that really changed me as a person. So first lesson that really I want to share with you is that customers and the information you give them, that's what's important. It's not technology. WAP, ASP, instant messaging, grid computing, portal, biometrics, AR, VR, Web 2.0, peer-to-peer, IoT, 4G, 5G, Internet TV, DVB, big data, wearables, NLP, autonomous vehicles, you name it, neural network, deep neural network, digital twin, crypto, lately serverless, Kubernetes, and blockchain. All those are all hypes that really have come and go since the 2000s, right? And while the hypes come and go, the actually big picture quite remains the same. So it's more important than technology itself actually are the customers, and especially how good an experience you give them. Technology is irrelevant if your customers are not happy. So whether you use Ruby, Python, Node, Haskell, or Clojure, Kubernetes, serverless, monolith, microservices, the customer happiness is really making the final call. I've seen actually fantastic customer experience and fantastic apps, genuinely successful businesses run on less than polished software systems. And so honestly, technology is moving too fast, always to make sound technological decisions, right? So how many front-end frameworks are going to be released just during this talk, right? Most of the time, successful teams guess and actually take a shot at it instead of knowing everything. What they do differently is they adjust the course of things. And to me, that really has become the measure of success, is how fast you can correct course once you have customer feedback. And if you notice first, you need to have customer feedback, right? Only then you can correct course. Otherwise, you go blind. So really focus on that feedback loop. And it means few things. It means listen to your customers, forget your ego, and that's hard. Invest in automation early, like CI/CD pipeline, for example, and then simply repeat. It's a continuous loop. Most of what we build in the cloud is really organized around data, and data with a big D. So we store data, we process it, and we move it around. And that's easy, right? So how fast you move it influences the price and the accuracy of the information you extract from data. The rest is mostly operation. How much time you spend on operations influences the price. But more importantly, the amount of time you spend listening and adjusting course, the amount of time you spend on operation is the time you don't spend with your customers. So my advice is really choose wisely. The second lesson is, well, you can't know everything. And that's a hard one. Right? Technology changes too fast to keep track of all of it while maintaining actually a balanced life. And we learned during these times that actually having a balanced life is very, very important. So trying to keep up with technological changes is like trying to make sense of AWS services naming convention, like AWS, Amazon. It's really impossible. As a developer advocate for AWS, I often get asked, how do you keep up with everything? And there's a news for you. Actually, I don't. Everyone struggles with that. Everyone is struggling to keep up. Everyone is worried to be left behind the waves of the different technological evolutions and hypes that we see. And even people who seem to have it all together, they are more like you and me than you can believe. And there's a weird paradox to knowledge. The more you know, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And of course, we feel bad about it. We feel like imposters. I certainly feel like, and I continue to feel like it regularly. To me, the imposter syndrome was and continue to be one of the hardest things to deal with. And I'm 40 years old, white male, so you can imagine what it must be for women in tech and other minorities. So communities like this one, what you've built here, there in Australia and New Zealand, have really helped me overcome my fears a lot. And I started taking part in those communities, and I could discuss, I could practice, often without being judged. And this is so, so important. There's another weird paradox that exists. As you become more senior, you know less and less about new technologies, right? And yet, the most inspiring engineering reviews I've participated in while working at Amazon were with very, very senior engineers. We call them the senior principal at Amazon, and there are about 70 of them. So what's their secret? To me, it comes to three things that they do very, very, very well. First, they listen. They ask questions, and a lot of them. And then they challenge ideas and biases. And I will come to biases a bit later. But do you notice something in this? Well, these are all people skills. They listen, they are curious, and they dive deep. So senior engineers are actually more like people engineers rather than technology engineers. And that leads me to my lesson number 3. Invest in people's skills. And that's as much as you invest time in learning about the latest Node.js framework, Kubernetes, or serverless. No one's technical skills is irreplaceable. And I can tell you, I learned this the very hard way. One day, back in my years, one day after about 3 years of working heart and soul for a startup, which actually was number 2 employee, I got fired, and I got fired over a cup of coffee. I arrived one morning at work with a smile on my face. But a coffee later, I was walking out the door with all my books and without a job, and it was terrifying. Sure, we had financial difficulties, so it was predictable, but I had built everything from scratch, and I knew every line of code, and I never ever thought that I would be the first one to let go. But I was, and my technical skills that I thought were irreplaceable were in fact fast covered by the new cheaper workforce that we just hired out of college. And they did an amazing job. Right. So the only option you have to stand out and stay relevant is really to invest in people, and especially in people skills. And I get it. For many of us, it's difficult. I'm quite introvert, and it's very, very difficult sometimes to get those people skills, but it's critical. And there are many skills that that are necessary, but in my opinion, there's one that stands out, and it's called empathy. And Bill Billard said correctly, and I quote, "Opinion is really the lowest form of human knowledge. It requires no accountability, no understanding. The highest form of knowledge is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another's world. It requires profound purpose larger than the self kind of understanding." And I love these quotes, right? So when I got fired over this cup of coffee, I had a lot of opinions. I was a lead developer, so I had a lot of empathy for the developer team, right, that I managed, but I had a lot of opinion toward the management teams. And those opinions cost me my job. So while I understood our developers, I failed to communicate upward and failed to understand the different business needs. So like most things in life, you have to find the right balance to be successful. But the more people skills you have, the easier it will be. 4, embrace failure. And that one I got right the first time when I did my talk in India. So while we have learned that almost everything will work again if you reboot it, including you, sometimes things just fail. You can ask Murphy about it. Brian Tracy beautifully said it, and I quote, "It is not failure itself that holds you back. It's the fear of failure that paralyzes you." So let me start by saying that scared developers won't try things out. They won't innovate for you as fast as your business would need to. They won't dare to jump in and fix things, and pardon my French, when shit hits the fan. They won't do work more than you ask for, and especially they won't stay long in the job. I know because I was one of those. Failure should not be seen as you are a failure, but merely as moving along the path of experimentation. If you don't fail, you're probably not trying hard enough, nor pushing the limit of the adjacent possible. So innovation flourishes in a community where ideas are exchanged, discussed, tried, improved over time. A community like this one. But most of all, innovation flourishes in an environment that embraces failure. If you remember Thomas Edison, he tested more than 6,000 different materials before settling on the light bulb using carbonized bamboo. Sure, it was lightning 3 minutes, but it was enough to fool the journalist. Failure tends to teach you a lesson that reading books and blog posts can't teach you. The most successful team I've worked with are those that I failed the hardest with, but we were prepared to fail, and especially we were not afraid of losing our job. So the best way to learn from failure is to practice failure. And you know, I had to mention chaos engineering at least once in this talk because that's really is my passion. But you also have to work on minimizing the blast radius of failures, and techniques like bulk hake, sharding, isolation, load shedding, graceful degradations, immutability, they all will come handy. So you should probably get familiar with those ones. And I wrote blog posts, there's tons of information online, and I strongly suggest everyone to look at it. But again, this technology itself won't make your system more robust. People will, which brings me to point 5. Don't blame people when things fail. Sidney Dekker, one of the most critical writers in the field of safety engineering, rightly said, and I quote, "The question is not who is responsible for failure. Rather, it asks what is responsible for things going wrong. What is the set of engineered and organized circumstances that is responsible for people putting in a position where they end up doing things that go wrong. Everyone screws up, and one day so will you. I screwed up several times, actually big time. I deleted databases in production twice while trying to recover from an outage. but that's the topic of another talk. Do you think I woke up that morning thinking, today I will come to work and do a shitty job and I will delete database in production? Well, of course not. Everyone has good intention, and everyone, and no one wants to screw up. And we have good intention even when we screw up. So don't blame individuals or teams. Don't assign or imply blame to others, individual, groups, organization. Instead, try to identify what happened and question why these things happened. Right? Stopping at people error isn't right. It's a sign that you haven't gone deep enough into the root cause analysis. Think about the situation that led the operator, me, for example, to trigger that event, deleting a database. Why was the operator able to do such a thing? Was it a lack of proper tool, a problem in the culture, a missing process? To continue the story on the deleting of database, well, we had an extremely crazy culture. We were working like 16 hours nonstop on the problem. We had sales over promising features, and there was a lot of issue, and we had a small outage. Everyone was screaming. We didn't have the right process. We didn't have isolation rooms. We didn't have any processes. We didn't have the right tools in places to avoid such mistakes. So yeah, I deleted database in production, but that's because we didn't have the right tools, we didn't have the right processes, and especially we didn't have the right culture. So continuing on databases, that leads me to point 6. Route 53 is not a database, and that's regardless of what Guinea Pig says on Twitter, right? He says a lot of things, but I think this was probably the funniest thing that he could say. So yeah, Route 53 is not a key value store, my friends. Which leads me to point 7. Watch out for heuristics and biases. Being aware of cognitive biases when performing your job is actually a superpower that will often make the difference between becoming an inspiring leader or not. Cognitive bias impacts our perception of reality. It drives us to making the incorrect conclusions and often actually irrational decisions. So while I don't think removing bias is possible, it definitely will help you if you can identify them and properly adjust your perceptions and question your assumptions. Some of the bias and heuristics to watch for are the confirmation bias, which is the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information that confirms or supports your personal beliefs and values. The sunk cost fallacy that make people believe that because they have invested a lot of money on the technology, it justifies further expenditures. The common belief fallacy, the idea that if many people believe something, it must be right. Blockchain, for example. The inside bias, the tendency for people to perceive events that have already occurred as being more predictable if they were taking place before the event. The fundamental attribution error, which is the tendency to believe that what people do reflect who they are. And there is a lot more. There's the optimistic bias, the overconfidence bias, the wishful thinking, anchoring bias, bandwagon effect, the cargo cut, the correspondence bias, and you get the idea. We are full of imperfections. We are humans. So spend some time reading about those heuristic and biases. First, it's very interesting, but it also will make you actually a better developer. It will give you more understanding of the situation, give you more context, and it also will help you become a better manager and eventually an inspiring leader. And honestly, it will make you a better person overall, not only for your job. 8, writing. So I started writing my blog in January 9th of 2018, which is actually after I gave first version of this talk in India. That was about 2.5 years ago. Julien Simon, who is the machine learning principal developer advocate for Amazon, had tried to convince me for a year before I wrote my first words down. And I was actually very worried. I had nothing to say. I was so afraid that I deleted words as fast as I was writing them down. You know, the fear of failing does paralyze you. But eventually, I took Julian's advice and I published my first blog post and then the second and the third. And today, with approximately 60 blog posts published and nearly 300,000 visitors a year, I can easily say that writing that first blog post was one of the most important things in my career. One crucial thing I learned along the way, and I want to share that with you, is that every writer writes terrible first draft and second draft and third draft. Every single writer. Eventually, after tens of iterations, words starts to make sense, but it takes time, so don't give up. The funny thing is that I actually hated writing most of my school life, and reading as well for that matter, and long after. It still takes me an absurd amount of time to put my words together. But in the process, it also clarifies my ideas. It puts them in orders. It crystallizes them. So the key to writing is to start and then do it word by word. And if you're like me, you're probably often wondering what to write about. And one of my favorite writer, Anne Lamott, said, remember that, and I quote, remember that every single thing that happened to you is yours and you get to tell it. And that is so true. What problem did you solve lately? Why? How? What happened to you a few days ago, month or years ago is probably happening to someone else today. So tell your story. For only you, with your own words, you can tell it. My favorite part of writing is actually the review process. And as soon as I have some drafts, I select several victims in my team, in the broader network, and ask them to review it, to challenge my ideas and opinions, and especially to surface the biases we talked about. The review process is quite challenging as you have to deal with critics. You know, the same critics that you get when someone criticizes your code, right? How dare you criticize my baby? Well, getting critics is actually very humbling and for the better. It forces you to listen, to learn and improve. And that's hard. Of course, you need to find competent reviewers that care about your success, reviewers that aren't scared about telling you the truth. So make sure you have some of them in your network of influence. And if one day any of you decide to start writing, I would happily become one of them. 9, mentoring. So throughout my career, I've had the chance to have amazing mentors, whether in my work or outside my career. I've had few people that have really helped me move forward. And sometimes it's as simple as bouncing ideas back and forth to see the clearer picture. Other times it's just getting encouragement, a tap on the shoulder, and some advices about what to do next. A good mentor can help you be your better self, and everyone needs a mentor. Actually, all my mentors have mentors themselves. I have mentors, they have mentors. Mentoring others has been really important to me, and especially in the past few years. Most people enter their professional life with little understanding of the complex landscape and expectation for excellence required to be successful. I certainly had no idea what I was doing when I started. It's not a problem per se, for it's the natural unrolling of life. But it's scary at times and a rather excellent opportunity for mentoring and supporting others. Mentoring is essential not only because of the knowledge and skill one can learn from mentors, but also because mentoring provides professional and personal support that facilitates successes. And research shows that people with good mentor have a higher chance of success and more significant career advancement potential. So open yourself for mentoring others and look out for your own personal mentor as well. Last but not least, learn from others. And that I got right as well 2.5 years ago. Learning from others is the single most important thing I've learned. And I have to admit, sometimes I have to remind myself to shut up and listen. There's always someone in the room that knows more than you do. And that person is just not necessarily broadcasting it or spreading the jam on the bread, like we say in France. So be open and ready to be challenged by others to change your opinion. Share your ideas with others, challenge them, and especially let others do so. Fortunately, there are myriads of ways to do this. Participating in the community is, of course, one of them. So a few weeks ago, while preparing for this talk, I asked the Developer Advocate team to share with me some of their lessons, and a few of them kindly answers. But bear with me, I didn't really know back then what I was going to talk about today, right? So when I asked my question, it was really heavily biased towards getting technical answers. So despite my first lesson, which was not to focus on technology, I'm gonna share some of those ideas that the team has shared with me. Javier Ramirez, who is a developer advocate in MEA, said, do not use the AWS as a traditional data center. Have consistent naming, tagging strategies early on, especially for everything that has unique names, S3 bucket, for example. Alex Casalboni, learn IAM policies before you do anything serious. Master infrastructure as code, whether it's CloudFormation or Terraform. Use the management console only to build prototypes. For the first time you try a new service, and then switch to infrastructure as code for anything else. Boaz Ziniman said, account security, don't use the root account. Always enable MFA. Set IAM users for every developer with different roles. Tag everything. Enrique Duos, who leads the MEA evangelist team, says security, security, security. Dennis Trout, who is a developer advocate in MEA, says turn on CloudTrail, turn on guard duty. Don't assume that the development team will consider security when building on AWS. So he's with Enrique on that, and he says think security. Marcia Vilbana, who is an evangelist in the Nordics with me here in Finland, she says, try to see if there is a managed service before building it yourself. # lesson learned. Danilo Poccia says, adopt the right mindset. With on-prem virtualization and hosting, you have finite amount of resource that you try to squeeze as much as possible. With the cloud, you have actually virtually unlimited set of resources, but you should use the minimum you need at any point in time. Sebastian Stormak says, use EC2 only if you have exhausted all other possibilities, not because EC2 is bad, but because no machine to manage is better than one machine to manage. So go serverless as much as you can. And serverless is not only Lambda, it's also RDS, Cognito, S3, API gateway, etc., etc. Ricardo Suera says, shift the conversation around AWS from technology to business outcomes. It will help you get the exec sponsors support required for success. From a technical point of view, bet on automation, resist being obsessed with the console. And two more. Isabel Huerga, who actually is my mentee, says governance, everything that is not clearly defined will be done by no one. Or best case, it will be, but not consistently. So goes to accountability and ownership, which is not good to leave to good faith. when what is risk is your whole business. So don't wait until a production disruption to enable support. Set up budget alert. Stephen Bryan says, well, my advice is to think differently about things like dynamic allocations of resources. An example would be security groups. You can create rules referencing another security group, which means new instances automatically match the rule and have access as they scale. It's very different from the traditional on-prem mindset, but is so valuable. And finally, Cobus Bernard says, read the pricing page for service and set up billing alert. So feel free to connect with them and challenge them on their ideas and their own biases. And I'm sure they will love that. But that's it for me now. And again, thanks a lot for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts, deepest thoughts. Thank you very much. And I have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks. It's no doubt an inspiring talk, Adrian. And there are so many takeaways from this. I'm very sure lots of us in the audience can resonate from this. And I'm definitely one of them. Yeah? And making us realize that technology skills is actually not really the biggest part of it. It's usually people skills. Right? So thank you so much for sharing this and knowledge of your experience. And though we have a lot of heaps of questions, but I think we're running out of time. So we probably only have one very quick question we can answer, right? And you mentioned that as there are lots of hypes happening, right? So there are like a quantum computing, AI, blockchain, and so on and so forth. But how does AWS actually pick which one to invest before, without actually being too late or too early? If you just answer very quickly for this question, that would be good.
I would say listen to customers, right? I find customers have the answer. So if you can listen to them and remove the noise from the conversation and try and focus on what will make them successful, it gives you a good idea of where to start. And then you need to maybe innovate a little bit on their behalf. But I would say listen to customers.
Adrian, this is like the answer that Jeff Barr gave yesterday. It's
I guess
like you guys talked about it.
Company.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I just wanted to add to what Gus has said before. Awesome talk, really enjoyable. Our director John actually wrote a note saying that this is like TED Talk worthy, and completely agreed with that. It was so interesting. Already had requests for like a YouTube version of this, which it will go up on YouTube. So thank you again. I don't know.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. I don't know, Director John, do we have 1 more minute for questions, or are we all out? Can you send me a signal? Okay, we have 1 more minute. 1 more minute. So, Gus, I'm going to ask my question.
Go ahead.
Adrian, what was the hardest problem you had to tackle at AWS? And it could be technical, or it could be some other kind of problem. And how did you go about approaching it or solving it? It's a tough question, I know.
It's a hard question, but I'll be very honest. So, like I always say, AWS is a company for smart people, or people for smart people to feel bad about themselves, because the company is filled with absolutely amazing people, and maybe in the past I was often, I would say, or I was considering myself often as, the 10x developer. The ego was big when, it's easy to have a big ego. But when you enter the room and in the room, there are people that invented Java, invented the cloud, build EC2s. Well, very fast you feel very, 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 very small. And I would say, that was the hardest lesson to me, is a personal lesson, is like, how do you stay relevant, or how do you avoid and I talked about this the imposter syndrome in a company which is filled with people. And the funny thing is, everyone has the imposter syndromes. And actually this was very, very interesting for me to see that is a lot of people suffer from the same thing, and they just don't talk about it.
Cool. Excellent. All right, I think we have to wrap up. Unfortunately, I wish we could keep going, but Adrian, thank you so very much for your keynote.
Thank you very
And
much
yeah,
for
we'll hope
having
you
me.
come back next time as well. I think we'll go to a short break for a couple of minutes. We'll bring up our slide with the agenda, and then yeah, we'll be back for our next talk. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. See you guys soon.